Close your eyes and let the warm Mediterranean breeze carry you across wine-dark seas to a land of white marble temples and olive groves, where philosophers debated beneath shaded colonnades and warriors trained for glory in sunlit gymnasiums. The air smells of thyme and sea salt, of burning incense and fresh-pressed olive oil. You are entering ancient Greece, the civilization that gave birth to democracy and drama, to philosophy and the Olympic Games, to ideas and ideals that still shape our world 25 centuries later. This is the land of Homer and Socrates, of Sparta and Athens, of gods who lived on Mount Olympus and heroes who sailed to the edges of the known world. A land of city-states that warred endlessly among themselves, yet united to defeat the greatest empire on earth. A land where a small peninsula at the edge of Europe became the crucible of Western civilization, forging concepts of freedom, beauty, truth, and human excellence that echo through every library and legislature, every theater and stadium, every school and courthouse in the modern world. Tonight, as you drift toward peaceful sleep, we will explore the wonders of ancient Greece, from the Bronze Age palaces of Mycenae to the Golden Age of Athens, from the severe discipline of Sparta to the conquests of Alexander the Great. Let your breathing slow and your body relax as we journey through one of the most creative and influential civilizations in human history, a civilization whose legacy surrounds you even now, in the very language you speak and the ideas you think. Fact 1. Ancient Greek civilization emerged from the shadows of a lost world. Before the classical Greeks, whose names we know, before Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, there existed an earlier Greek civilization so magnificent that later Greeks believed it was the age of heroes and gods. This was the Mycenaean civilization, which flourished from approximately 1600 to 1100 BCE, building massive palaces, trading across the Mediterranean, and inspiring the legends that Homer would later immortalize in the Iliad and the Odyssey. When this civilization collapsed in a catastrophe we still do not fully understand, Greece entered a dark age from which classical civilization would eventually emerge. Fact 2. The Mycenaean Greeks built citadels of such massive stone that later Greeks believed only giants called Cyclopes could have constructed them. The Lion Gate at Mycenae, with its enormous carved lintel depicting two lions flanking a pillar, still stands after more than 3,000 years as a testament to Mycenaean power and ambition. The walls of Mycenaean citadels were built from stones so large that some weigh over 100 tons. These fortifications protected palaces that served as administrative centers for kingdoms that controlled much of the Greek mainland during the Late Bronze Age. Fact 3. The Mycenaean Greeks were warriors and traders who established connections throughout the Mediterranean world. They traded with Egypt, where Mycenaean pottery has been found in tombs of the pharaohs. They established settlements on the coast of Asia Minor, in Cyprus, and in southern Italy. They may have been the Ahiwa mentioned in Hittite records, a powerful foreign kingdom with which the Hittite Empire had complex diplomatic relations. The Mycenaeans were not isolated villagers, but participants in an interconnected Bronze Age world that stretched from Mesopotamia to the Western Mediterranean. Fact 4. The Trojan War, if it occurred at all, probably took place during the Mycenaean period, around 1200 BC. Homer's Iliad, composed centuries later, preserves memories of Mycenaean warfare, describing bronze weapons, boars' tusk helmets, and massive tower shields that had gone out of use by Homer's own time. The city of Troy, located on the northwestern coast of modern Turkey, was a real place that was destroyed repeatedly throughout its long history. Whether any of these destructions corresponds to the war Homer describes remains a matter of scholarly debate, but the legend of Troy has shaped Western imagination for nearly 3 millennia. Fact 5. Around 1200 BC, the Bronze Age civilizations of the Eastern Mediterranean collapsed in a catastrophe that historians call the Bronze Age collapse. The Mycenaean palaces were destroyed, the Hittite Empire fell, Egypt barely survived, and cities throughout the Levant were burned. The causes remain mysterious, possibly including climate change, earthquakes, disruption of trade networks, and invasions by peoples the Egyptians called the Sea Peoples. Greece entered a dark age lasting approximately 300 years, during which writing was lost, population declined dramatically, and the achievements of Mycenaean civilization were forgotten except in oral poetry. Fact 6. Let yourself drift now through the Dark Age, when the great palaces lay in ruins and the skills of their builders were lost. Shepherds grazed their flocks among fallen columns. Villagers built simple huts where kings had once feasted in painted halls. The sea lanes that had connected Greece to the wider world fell silent. Yet in this darkness, something was preserved. Around campfires and in modest halls, bards sang of the deeds of heroes, of the wrath of Achilles and the wanderings of Odysseus, keeping alive the memory of a glorious past that would inspire a glorious future. Fact 7. The Greeks emerged from their dark age gradually, developing new forms of social organization centered on the polis, or city-state. A polis was more than just a city. It was an independent political community comprising an urban center and its surrounding territory, governing itself according to its own laws and customs. Eventually, over 1,000 polis dotted the Greek world, from the shores of the Black Sea to the coasts of Spain and North Africa. Each polis had its own character, its own government, its own patron gods, and its own fierce pride and independence. The Greeks never unified into a single nation but remained a collection of often warring city-states united by language, religion, and culture. Fact 8. The two most famous and powerful Greek city-states were Athens and Sparta, whose rivalry would shape Greek history for centuries. Athens, located in the region of Attica, developed into a center of trade, culture, and eventually democracy. Sparta, located in the Peloponnese, developed into a militaristic society where every male citizen was trained from childhood to be a soldier. These two cities represented fundamentally different visions of Greek life. Athens celebrated individual achievement, artistic expression, and political participation, while Sparta valued collective discipline, military excellence, and stability. Their conflict would culminate in the devastating Peloponnesian War. Fact 9. The Greeks adopted and adapted the Phoenician alphabet, creating the first fully phonetic writing system with symbols for both consonants and vowels. This innovation made writing easier to learn than the earlier syllabic scripts used by Mycenaean scribes, potentially democratizing literacy in ways that would have profound consequences. The Greek alphabet became the ancestor of the Latin alphabet used by English and most European languages, as well as the Cyrillic alphabet used by Russian and other Slavic languages. Every letter you read traces its lineage back to Greek innovations in representing language. Fact 10. Homer, the legendary poet credited with composing the Iliad and the Odyssey, stands at the beginning of Western literature. Almost nothing is known about Homer as a historical figure. Even in antiquity, Greeks debated when and where he lived, and whether a single poet composed both epics. The Iliad tells the story of a few weeks during the 10th year of the Trojan War, focusing on the wrath of the hero Achilles. The Odyssey follows the hero Odysseus on his 10-year journey home from Troy, encountering monsters, goddesses, and the limits of human endurance. Together, these poems establish themes and techniques that poets have drawn upon ever since. Fact 11. The Iliad explores the nature of heroism, honor, and mortality through the conflict between Achilles, the greatest of the Greek warriors, and Agamemnon, the leader of the Greek expedition. When Agamemnon takes a captive woman who had been awarded to Achilles, the hero withdraws from battle in rage, dooming many of his comrades to death. The poem reaches its emotional climax not in victory but in grief, as Achilles and Priam, king of Troy, weep together over the body of Priam's son Hector, whom Achilles has killed. In this moment of shared humanity between enemies, Homer reveals the tragic cost of war and the fragile bonds that connect all mortals. Fact 12. The Odyssey follows Odysseus, the cleverest of the Greek heroes, as he struggles to return home after the fall of Troy. His journey takes him past the Lotus Eaters who offer forgetfulness, past the Cyclops Polyphemus whom he blinds to escape, past the enchantress Circe who turns his men into pigs, past the sirens whose songs lure sailors to their deaths, between the monster Scylla and the whirlpool Charybdis, and finally to the island of the nymph Calypso, who offers him immortality, if he will stay with her. Odysseus refuses immortality, choosing instead to return to his mortal wife Penelope and his rocky island home of Ithaca. His choice affirms the value of human life with all its limitations. Fact 13. Rest now in the world of Homeric heroes, where mortals and immortals mingled and the boundaries between legend and history were not yet drawn. The wine-dark sea stretches to horizons beyond which anything might be found. Gods watch from Olympus, sometimes helping and sometimes hindering human endeavors according to their own inscrutable purposes. Heroes strive for glory that will outlast their brief lives, knowing that even the greatest must eventually descend to the gray realm of Hades. This is the mythic world that shaped Greek imagination, a world of wonder and terror that still has the power to move us across 28 centuries. Fact 14. The ancient Greeks worshipped a pantheon of gods and goddesses believed to live on Mount Olympus, the highest mountain in Greece. Zeus, the king of the gods, ruled over sky and thunder. His wife Hera was goddess of marriage and family. Poseidon ruled the seas, Hades the underworld, Athena embodied wisdom and warfare, Apollo represented music, poetry, and the sun, Artemis was goddess of the hunt and the moon, Aphrodite governed love and beauty, Ares personified war, Hephaestus was the divine craftsman, Hermes served as messenger of the gods, and Dionysus presided over wine and ecstasy. These 12 Olympians, along with numerous lesser deities, received worship throughout the Greek world. Fact 15. Greek religion was not a matter of personal faith in the modern sense, but of proper ritual observance that maintained good relations between humans and gods. The Greeks built temples to house cult statues of the gods, offered animal sacrifices on outdoor altars, celebrated festivals with processions and competitions, and consulted oracles to learn the divine will. They believed that the gods could be pleased or angered by human actions and that proper worship brought divine favor, while neglect or impiety invited disaster. Religion was woven into every aspect of Greek life, from agriculture to warfare, from birth to death. Fact 16. The oracle at Delphi was the most prestigious religious site in the Greek world, where the god Apollo was believed to speak through a priestess called the Pythia. Located on the slopes of Mount Parnassus in central Greece, Delphi attracted consultants from throughout the Mediterranean seeking divine guidance on matters ranging from personal decisions to state policy. The Pythia would enter a trance, perhaps induced by gases rising from a fissure in the rock, and utter prophecies that priests would interpret for questioners. The oracle's responses were often ambiguous, lending themselves to multiple interpretations that could validate different outcomes. Fact 17. Greek mythology comprised not just stories of gods, but an entire worldview explaining the origins of the cosmos, the nature of human existence, and the proper relationships between mortals and immortals. The poet Hesiod, a near contemporary of Homer, composed the Theogony, which traces the genealogy of the gods from primordial chaos through successive generations of divine beings. His works and days offers practical wisdom for farmers alongside mythological tales, including the story of Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods to give to humanity and was punished by Zeus with eternal torment. These myths provided frameworks for understanding that shaped Greek thought for centuries. Fact 18. The hero was a central figure in Greek mythology and religion, a being greater than ordinary mortals, but less than gods. Heroes were often the offspring of gods and humans, possessing extraordinary abilities that allowed them to accomplish feats beyond normal human capacity. Heracles, the greatest of the Greek heroes, was the son of Zeus and the mortal woman Alcmene. His 12 labors, imposed as penance for killing his family in a fit of madness sent by Hera, took him to the edges of the known world and beyond. Heroes received worship at their tombs, where their spirits were believed to have power to help or harm the living. Fact 19. Perseus, another famous hero, was the son of Zeus and the princess Danae. He was sent to kill the Gorgon Medusa, whose gaze turned living things to stone. With gifts from the gods including winged sandals, a cap of invisibility, and a magical pouch, Perseus succeeded in beheading Medusa while looking only at her reflection in his polished shield. On his journey home, he rescued the princess Andromeda from a sea monster and eventually accidentally killed his grandfather, fulfilling a prophecy that his grandfather had tried to prevent by setting Perseus and his mother adrift at sea. The Greeks understood that fate could not be escaped. Fact 20. Theseus, the greatest Athenian hero, was said to have killed the Minotaur, a monster with the body of a man and the head of a bull, which lived in the labyrinth beneath the palace of King Minos on Crete. Athens had been required to send 7 young men and 7 young women to Crete every 9 years as tribute, to be fed to the Minotaur. Theseus volunteered to go as one of the victims, killed the Minotaur with the help of the Princess Ariadne, and escaped from the labyrinth by following a thread he had unwound on his way in. Theseus was credited with unifying Attica under Athenian leadership and establishing many Athenian institutions. Fact 21. Let the heroes rest now in the halls of memory, their great deeds accomplished, their names preserved in poetry and stone. They faced monsters and gods, descended to the underworld and returned, sailed to the ends of the earth in search of golden fleeces and golden apples. They were not perfect. Many committed terrible acts that brought suffering to themselves and others. But they strove for excellence, for glory that would outlive their mortal bodies, and in this striving they embodied Greek ideals that would inspire generations. Sleep now, surrounded by their stories, protected by their ancient valor. Fact 22. The Olympic Games, the most famous athletic competition in the ancient world, began in 776 BCE at Olympia in the western Peloponnese. According to tradition, this date was used by Greeks to calculate years, reckoning events as occurring in particular Olympiads, or 4-year periods between games. The games were held in honor of Zeus and attracted competitors and spectators from throughout the Greek world. For the duration of the festival, a sacred truce was declared, allowing travelers to pass safely through territories that might otherwise be at war. The Olympics continued for over 1,000 years until abolished by the Christian Roman Emperor Theodosius in 393 CE. Fact 23. The original Olympic competition was a single foot race of approximately 192 meters, called the stadion, from which we derive the word stadium. Over time, additional events were added including longer races, wrestling, boxing, the pankration, a brutal combination of wrestling and boxing with few rules, chariot racing, and the pentathlon comprising the stadion, long jump, discus throw, javelin throw, and wrestling. Only free Greek males were allowed to compete, and they did so nude, with their bodies oiled. Women were forbidden even to watch the games, with one exception: The priestess of Demeter had a seat of honor. Fact 24. Victors at the Olympic Games received only a crown of wild olive leaves as their official prize, but this simple wreath brought enormous prestige. Olympic champions were celebrated as heroes in their home cities, sometimes receiving free meals for life, prominent seats at public events, and statues erected in their honor. Poets composed victory odes celebrating their achievements, and their fame could spread throughout the Greek world. The value placed on athletic excellence reflected broader Greek ideals of arete, excellence or virtue, which could be demonstrated through physical achievement as well as intellectual or moral accomplishment. Fact 25. Beyond Olympia, the Greeks celebrated numerous other athletic festivals, including the Pythian Games at Delphi honoring Apollo, the Isthmian Games at Corinth honoring Poseidon, and the Nemean Games honoring Zeus. Together with the Olympics, these four festivals formed the Panhellenic Games, a circuit of competitions that united Greeks from different cities in common celebration. Athletic competition was so important to Greek identity that Greek colonies established their own games, and the gymnasium, where young men trained, became a defining institution of Greek civilization wherever it spread. Fact 26. Greek theater emerged from religious festivals honoring Dionysus, the god of wine and ecstasy. In Athens, the most important of these festivals was the city Dionysia, held each spring, where playwrights competed for prizes by presenting trilogies of tragedies followed by a satiric play. Tragedy, the most prestigious dramatic form, explored profound questions about fate, justice, and the relationship between humans and gods through stories drawn from mythology and legend. The three great tragedians whose works survive, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, created plays that continue to be performed and studied over 2,400 years later. Fact 27. Aeschylus, the earliest of the three tragedians, fought at the Battle of Marathon and reportedly considered his military service more important than his literary achievements. He is credited with introducing a second actor, allowing for dialogue between characters rather than only between an actor and the chorus. His Orestia, the only complete tragic trilogy to survive, traces the cycle of violence in the house of Atreus from Agamemnon's murder by his wife Clytemnestra through his son Orestes' revenge and trial before the court of the Areopagus in Athens. The trilogy explores the evolution from blood vendetta to civil justice. Fact 28. Sophocles, who won more first prizes at the city Dionysia than any other playwright, introduced a third actor and was known for his complex character development and dramatic irony. His Oedipus Rex, which Aristotle considered the perfect tragedy, tells the story of a king who unknowingly kills his father and marries his mother, fulfilling a prophecy he had tried desperately to avoid. When Oedipus discovers the truth, he blinds himself and goes into exile. The play explores themes of fate versus free will, the limits of human knowledge, and the terrible consequences of well-intentioned actions. Fact 29. Euripides, the youngest of the three tragedians, was known for his psychological realism and his sympathetic portrayal of marginalized figures including women, slaves, and foreigners. His Medea tells the story of a woman who, abandoned by the husband for whom she had sacrificed everything, takes terrible revenge by killing their children. His Bacchae explores the consequences of denying the god Dionysus, as a king who refuses to acknowledge the god's divinity is torn apart by his own mother in a Dionysiac frenzy. Euripides' plays challenged conventional values and presented uncomfortable truths about human nature. Fact 30. Rest now in the theater of Dionysus, where the masks of tragedy gazed upon audiences of 15,000 Athenians gathered to witness the sufferings of kings and heroes. The afternoon sun slants across the marble seats, the chorus sings of fate and folly, and the actors speak words that have outlasted empires. The Greeks invented drama, the art of embodying others' lives, of feeling through fiction what we might never experience directly. In the theater, they confronted their deepest fears and highest aspirations, asking questions that still trouble and inspire us. The play continues even as you sleep. Fact 31. Greek comedy developed alongside tragedy, providing comic relief and social commentary at the same festivals. Aristophanes, the greatest comic playwright whose work survives, wrote plays that mocked contemporary politicians, philosophers, and even the gods themselves. His Clouds satirizes Socrates and the new intellectual trends. His Lysistrata imagines women ending the Peloponnesian War by refusing to have sex with their husbands until peace is made, and his Birds depicts two Athenians founding a city among the birds to escape the troubles of human society. Comedy allowed Greeks to laugh at themselves and their institutions. Fact 32. Greek philosophy began in the 6th century BC when thinkers in Ionia, on the western coast of what is now Turkey, began seeking natural explanations for phenomena previously attributed to gods. Thales of Miletus, often considered the first philosopher, proposed that water was the fundamental substance from which all things were made. His successors proposed other fundamental substances or principles. What united these early philosophers was their commitment to explaining the world through reason rather than myth, seeking underlying principles that could account for the apparent diversity of natural phenomena. Fact 33. Pythagoras, who lived in the 6th century BC, is famous today for the theorem bearing his name, though whether he actually discovered it is uncertain. Pythagoras founded a religious and philosophical community in southern Italy whose members believed in the transmigration of souls and the mystical significance of numbers. The Pythagoreans discovered the mathematical ratios underlying musical harmony and believed that the cosmos itself was structured according to mathematical principles. Their influence extended far beyond mathematics, shaping later Greek thought about the harmony and order of the universe. Fact 34. Heraclitus of Ephesus, known as the weeping philosopher for his melancholy disposition, taught that change was the fundamental nature of reality. His famous statement that you cannot step into the same river twice captures his insight that everything is in constant flux. Yet, Heraclitus also believed in an underlying logos, or rational principle, that governed change and gave it order. His emphasis on opposites and their unity, on the constant transformation of things into their contraries, influenced later philosophers including Plato, Hegel, and Nietzsche. Fact 35. Parmenides of Elea took the opposite position, arguing that change and motion were illusions and that true reality was unchanging, undivided, and eternal. His student Zeno devised famous paradoxes intended to show that motion was logically impossible. In the most famous of these, Achilles can never catch a tortoise that has a head start, because whenever Achilles reaches where the tortoise was, the tortoise has moved slightly ahead. These paradoxes challenged Greeks to think more rigorously about infinity, continuity, and the relationship between logic and experience. Fact 36. Let the paradoxes dissolve now into peaceful sleep. Achilles catches the tortoise. You step into the river. Change and permanence coexist in ways that exceed logic's grasp. The early Greek philosophers taught us to question, to seek reasons, to refuse easy answers that simply appeal to tradition or authority. This restless questioning spirit, this commitment to following argument wherever it leads, was Greece's greatest gift to human thought. Even now, as you rest, your mind continues its ancient quest for understanding, dreaming perhaps of answers not yet found. Fact 37. Democracy, the political system in which power rests with the citizens, was born in Athens in the late 6th and early 5th centuries BC. The word itself comes from Greek, demos meaning people and kratos meaning power or rule. Athenian democracy was not representative democracy as we know it. Citizens did not elect representatives but participated directly in the assembly, which met regularly to debate and vote on laws, treaties, war, and peace. This direct democracy was possible because Athens was a relatively small community and because citizenship was restricted to adult male Athenians whose parents were both citizens. Fact 38. The reforms of Cleisthenes in 508 BCE are usually credited with establishing Athenian democracy. Cleisthenes reorganized the citizen body into 10 tribes, each comprising citizens from different regions of Attica, breaking the power of local aristocratic factions. He established the Council of 500, chosen by lot from all citizens, which set the agenda for the assembly and oversaw day-to-day administration. He may also have introduced ostracism, a procedure by which citizens could vote to exile any person deemed a threat to the democracy for 10 years. These reforms distributed political power more broadly than any previous Greek system. Fact 39. The assembly, called the ecclesia, was the sovereign body of the Athenian democracy. Any male citizen could attend, speak, and vote. Meetings were held on the Nix, a hill near the Acropolis, where speakers addressed the crowd from a stone platform. Decisions were made by majority vote, typically by show of hands. The assembly voted on laws, declared war, concluded treaties, elected military commanders, and judged certain important cases. In theory, all citizens were equal, regardless of wealth or birth, and any citizen could rise to influence through his powers of persuasion. Fact 40. Most Athenian officials were chosen not by election but by lot, a system the Greeks believed was more democratic than voting because it gave every citizen an equal chance of serving. The Council of 500, the jurors who staffed the courts, and most magistrates were selected randomly from the citizen body. The major exception was the 10 generals, or strategoi, who were elected because military command required specific skills. This system prevented the concentration of power in wealthy families who might dominate elections and ensured that ordinary citizens gained experience in government. Fact 41. Athenian democracy had significant limitations by modern standards. Women, slaves, and resident foreigners had no political rights. Women remained under the authority of male relatives throughout their lives and were largely confined to the household. Slaves, who may have comprised 1/3 of the Athenian population, performed much of the labor that gave citizens the leisure for politics and culture. Resident foreigners, called metics, were welcome to live and work in Athens, but could not participate in government or own land. Athenian democracy was freedom for the few, built on the unfreedom of the many. Fact 42. Despite these limitations, Athenian democracy represented a revolutionary experiment in human governance. For the first time in history, ordinary citizens rather than kings, priests, or aristocrats made the decisions that shaped their community's destiny. The experience of participating in democratic politics encouraged critical thinking, public speaking, and engagement with complex issues. It created a culture in which ideas were debated openly and in which talented individuals could rise regardless of birth. The Athenian experiment inspired later democratic movements and continues to inform debates about the best form of government. Fact 43. Rests now in the marketplace of ideas, the Athenian agora, where citizens gathered to talk politics and philosophy, to buy and sell, to see and be seen. The agora was the heart of Athenian public life, surrounded by government buildings, temples, and stoas, or covered colonnades, where teachers and their students gathered. Socrates could be found here, questioning passers-by about justice and virtue. Merchants sold pottery and produce. Politicians tested arguments before bringing them to the assembly. The agora embodied the Greek conviction that public life was essential to human flourishing. Fact 44. Socrates, who lived from approximately 470 to 399 BC, is considered the founder of Western philosophy, though he wrote nothing himself. What we know of his thought comes from the writings of his students, particularly Plato, and from the accounts of other contemporaries. Socrates spent his days in the agora and gymnasiums of Athens, engaging citizens in conversations that exposed the contradictions in their beliefs. He claimed to know nothing and to be merely seeking wisdom, but his questioning often left his interlocutors confused and embarrassed, earning him both devoted followers and bitter enemies. Fact 45. The Socratic method, named after Socrates, is a technique of philosophical inquiry through dialogue. Rather than lecturing or asserting positions, Socrates would ask questions designed to lead his interlocutors to examine their beliefs more carefully. When someone claimed to know what justice or courage or piety was, Socrates would ask for a definition, then show through further questions that the definition was inadequate. This process, called elenchus or refutation, aimed not to humiliate but to clear away false beliefs and prepare the way for genuine knowledge. Fact 46. In 399 BC, Socrates was tried by an Athenian jury on charges of corrupting the youth and not believing in the gods of the city. He was found guilty and sentenced to death by drinking hemlock. Socrates accepted his sentence calmly, refusing opportunities to escape, arguing that he must obey the laws of the city that had raised and educated him. His death became one of the foundational stories of Western philosophy, a martyrdom for the life of reason. His student Plato, who witnessed the trial, dedicated his life to continuing and developing Socratic philosophy. Fact 47. Plato, who lived from approximately 428 to 348 BC, founded the Academy in Athens, one of the first institutions of higher learning in the Western world. The Academy continued for over 900 years until closed by the Byzantine Emperor Justinian in 529 CE. Plato wrote philosophical dialogues in which Socrates typically appears as the main character, exploring questions about knowledge, reality, ethics, politics, and the nature of the soul. His thought has influenced every subsequent generation of Western philosophers, and many consider him the most important philosopher who ever lived. Fact 48. Plato's theory of forms holds that the physical world we perceive through our senses is only a shadow of a higher reality consisting of perfect, eternal, unchanging forms. The form of beauty is perfectly beautiful, while beautiful things in the physical world only participate in beauty imperfectly and temporarily. The form of justice is what makes just actions just. Knowledge, for Plato, is not perception of physical things but intellectual grasp of the forms. This theory addressed the problems raised by earlier philosophers about change and permanence, offering a vision of reality in which both the changing physical world and the unchanging principles underlying it have their place. Fact 49. The Republic, Plato's most famous dialogue, presents his vision of an ideal city governed by philosopher kings who have achieved knowledge of the form of the good. In this city, the guardians who rule are selected for their intellectual and moral qualities, educated through a rigorous program of mathematics and philosophy, and live communally without private property or family attachments that might distract them from the common good. The Republic also contains the famous allegory of the cave, in which prisoners chained in a cave mistake shadows for reality until one escapes and sees the sun, representing the form of the good. Fact 50. Let the light of the good shine gently on your sleep, the light that Plato said illuminated all truth and beauty. In his vision, the philosopher's task was to ascend from the cave of ignorance into the sunlight of wisdom, then to return to the cave to guide others upward. This journey from darkness to light, from opinion to knowledge, from the particular to the universal, defines the philosophical life. Even if you never complete the journey, even if perfect wisdom remains beyond reach, the aspiration itself ennobles. Rest now in that aspiration, that love of wisdom that gives philosophy its name. Fact 51. Aristotle, who lived from 384 to 322 BCE, was Plato's most famous student and later became tutor to the young Alexander of Macedon, who would become Alexander the Great. Aristotle founded his own school in Athens called the Lyceum, where he taught while walking in the covered walkways, giving his followers the name Peripatetics, or those who walk about. Aristotle's works cover an astonishing range of subjects including logic, physics, biology, ethics, politics, rhetoric, and poetics. His influence on Western thought has been so profound that for centuries he was known simply as the philosopher. Fact 52. Unlike Plato, Aristotle believed that knowledge began with the senses and with careful observation of the physical world. He conducted extensive studies of plants and animals, classifying species and investigating their structures and functions. His biological works remained authoritative for nearly 2,000 years. Aristotle also developed formal logic, creating the system of syllogistic reasoning that dominated Western thought until the 19th century. His ethical works argued that happiness, or eudaimonia, was the highest human good, achieved through the exercise of virtue and practical wisdom in a complete life. Fact 53. Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, probably named after his son Nicomachus, explores what it means to live a good human life. Aristotle argues that virtue is a mean between extremes. Courage, for example, lies between cowardice and recklessness. Virtues are developed through practice until they become habits, or second nature. The person of practical wisdom, called phronesis, knows how to apply general principles to particular situations, making good decisions in complex circumstances. The highest happiness comes from the exercise of our highest faculty, reason, in contemplation of eternal truths. Fact 54. Greek science, though different in many ways from modern science, made remarkable progress in understanding the natural world through reason and observation. Greek astronomers developed models of the cosmos that correctly explained many celestial phenomena. Greek mathematicians proved theorems that remain valid today. Greek physicians developed theories of disease and treatment that, while often wrong by modern standards, represented rational attempts to understand the body. The Greeks did not conduct systematic experiments as modern scientists do, but they established the principle that nature operates according to regular laws discoverable by human reason. Fact 55. Hippocrates of Kos, who lived in the 5th century BCE, is known as the father of medicine. He and his followers developed an approach to illness that sought natural rather than supernatural explanations and emphasized careful observation of symptoms. The Hippocratic Corpus, a collection of medical writings attributed to Hippocrates and his school, includes treatises on various diseases, epidemics, surgery, and medical ethics. The Hippocratic Oath, still taken in modified form by physicians today, established principles of medical ethics, including the commitment to help the sick and do no harm. Fact 56. Greek mathematics reached heights that would not be surpassed for over a millennium. Euclid's Elements, composed around 300 BCE, organized the mathematical knowledge of the time into a logical system of axioms, definitions, and theorems that remained the standard geometry textbook until the 19th century. Archimedes of Syracuse made fundamental contributions to geometry, calculated an accurate approximation of pi, discovered principles of hydrostatics, and designed remarkable machines including the Archimedean screw for raising water. Greek mathematicians demonstrated that rigorous proof could establish certain knowledge about abstract objects. Fact 57. Rest now in the clarity of geometric truth, where triangles and circles obey eternal laws that human minds have discovered but not created. The Greeks found in mathematics a kind of knowledge immune to the doubts that plagued other forms of inquiry. The Pythagorean theorem was true in Plato's time and will be true forever, regardless of human opinion or cultural change. This discovery shaped Greek philosophy profoundly, encouraging the search for similar certainties in ethics and metaphysics. Perhaps in your dreams, geometric forms will dance their eternal patterns, beautiful because necessary, true because proven. Fact 58. Sparta, Athens' great rival, organized its entire society around military training and readiness. Spartan boys were taken from their families at age 7 to begin the agoge, a rigorous program of education and training that lasted until age 30. They lived in communal barracks, trained constantly in warfare, and were deliberately kept hungry to encourage resourcefulness. Spartan men remained professional soldiers throughout their lives, forbidden to engage in trade or craft. This system produced the finest warriors in Greece, but at the cost of individual freedom and cultural creativity. Fact 59. The Helots were a subject population in Sparta who worked the land and performed other labor, freeing Spartan citizens for military training. The Helots outnumbered the Spartans by perhaps 7-1, and fear of Helot revolt shaped Spartan society and policy. Each year, the Spartans formally declared war on the Helots, allowing them to kill any Helot without legal consequence. Young Spartans were sent into the countryside to practice military skills by hunting and killing Helots. This brutal system maintained Spartan power but created an underlying instability that would eventually contribute to Sparta's decline. Fact 60. Spartan women enjoyed freedoms unusual in the Greek world. They received physical education, were allowed to exercise outdoors, and were expected to maintain physical fitness so they could bear strong children. They managed household property while their husbands were away at war, which in Sparta was most of the time. They were known for their outspokenness. When a foreign woman remarked that Spartan women were the only ones who could rule men, a Spartan queen reportedly replied that Spartan women were the only ones who gave birth to men. Spartan women wielded informal influence that Athenian women could not dream of. Fact 61. The Persian Wars, fought between the Greeks and the Persian Empire in the early 5th century BCE, were defining events in Greek history. The Persian Empire, the largest the world had ever seen, stretched from Egypt to India, encompassing dozens of peoples and millions of subjects. When the Greeks of Ionia revolted against Persian rule and received help from Athens, King Darius of Persia determined to punish Athens and bring Greece under Persian control. The resulting conflicts pitted the vast resources of the Persian Empire against the fierce independence of the Greek city-states. Fact 62. The Battle of Marathon in 490 BCE was the first major engagement of the Persian Wars and one of the most famous battles in history. A Persian force of perhaps 25,000 soldiers landed at Marathon, northeast of Athens, intending to march on the city. The Athenians, with perhaps 10,000 hoplites and aided by a small force from Plataea, marched out to meet them. Against the odds, the Athenians attacked and routed the Persian force, killing over 6,000 Persians while losing only 192 of their own. Marathon became a symbol of Athenian courage and the superiority of free men fighting for their homeland. Fact 63. According to legend, after the victory at Marathon, a messenger named Phidippides ran the approximately 25 miles to Athens to announce the victory before collapsing and dying. This story, though probably legendary, inspired the modern marathon race. The victory at Marathon proved that the Persians could be beaten and established Athens as a leader of Greek resistance to Persian aggression. The Athenians who fought at Marathon were honored as heroes for generations, and veterans of the battle were accorded special respect throughout their lives. Fact 64. Let the dust of Marathon settle now, the clash of bronze fade to silence. The hoplites stand victorious over fallen enemies, shields battered, spears broken, but free. They fought not for a king or for plunder, but for their city and their liberty. Whatever faults Athenian democracy may have had, it produced citizens willing to die rather than submit to foreign tyranny. This was the spirit that made Greece great, the conviction that some things are worth fighting for, that freedom is precious because it can be lost. Rest now, protected by the memory of those who stood at Marathon. Fact 65. 10 years after Marathon, the Persians returned in force under King Xerxes, who assembled the largest army the world had ever seen, perhaps 150,000 soldiers along with a fleet of over 1,000 ships. The Greeks, facing this overwhelming threat, formed a rare alliance led by Sparta. At a congress in Corinth, representatives of the Greek cities agreed to put aside their quarrels and resist the Persian invasion together. This alliance demonstrated that despite their endless rivalries, the Greeks could unite when their fundamental freedom was at stake. Fact 66. The Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BCE became the most famous last stand in military history. A Greek force of perhaps 7,000 soldiers, including 300 Spartans under King Leonidas, held the narrow pass of Thermopylae against the Persian army for 3 days. When a local Greek showed the Persians a mountain path that allowed them to surround the Greek position, Leonidas dismissed most of his force and remained with his Spartans and some allies to cover their retreat. They fought to the last man, selling their lives dearly. An inscription at the site read, "Go, stranger, and tell the Lacedaemonians that we lie here, obedient to their orders." Fact 67. The sacrifice at Thermopylae bought time for the Greek fleet to engage the Persians at Artemisium and for Athens to evacuate its population. When the Persians reached Athens, they found the city empty and burned it, including the temples on the Acropolis. But the Athenians had placed their faith in their fleet, and at the Battle of Salamis in September 480 BCE, the Greek navy, composed largely of Athenian ships, destroyed the Persian fleet in the narrow straits between the island of Salamis and the mainland. Xerxes, fearing that the Greeks would sail to cut his bridge over the Hellespont, retreated with much of his army. Fact 68. The victory at Salamis was largely the achievement of the Athenian leader Themistocles, who had persuaded the Athenians to invest in a fleet of triremes, warships powered by 3 banks of oars. Themistocles convinced the Greeks to fight at Salamis by threatening to sail the Athenian fleet away if they retreated further, and he may have tricked the Persians into entering the straits where their numerical advantage was negated. After Salamis, Greece was saved. The remaining Persian forces in Greece were defeated the following year at Plataea and Mycale, ending the threat of Persian conquest. Fact 69. The Persian Wars transformed Greece, and especially Athens. Victory over the Persians validated the Greek way of life, confirming Greek belief in their own superiority and in the value of freedom over servitude. Athens, which had sacrificed its city and provided most of the fleet that won at Salamis, emerged as the leading power in Greece. The Delian League, an alliance of Greek states formed to continue the war against Persia, gradually transformed into an Athenian empire. The wealth and confidence that flowed from victory would fund the golden age of Athenian culture. Fact 70. Rest in the glow of victory, when Greece was saved and all things seemed possible. The Persians were driven back, the temples would be rebuilt more gloriously than before, and Athens would create achievements in art, architecture, philosophy, and drama that still astonish the world. This was the moment when the seeds planted over centuries burst into flower, when a small peninsula at the edge of Europe became the center of human creativity. The Golden Age was about to begin. Sleep now, and dream of columns rising against a blue sky. Fact 71. The Golden Age of Athens, roughly the mid-5th century BCE, was the period when Athenian culture reached its height under the leadership of the statesman Pericles. During this era, the Parthenon was built, The great tragedians wrote their masterpieces, Socrates began his philosophical mission, and Athens served as the school of Greece, as Pericles called it, attracting talented individuals from throughout the Greek world. This extraordinary flowering of creativity occurred within a single generation, in a city of perhaps 40,000 citizens. Fact 72. Pericles, who dominated Athenian politics from approximately 461 to 429 BCE, was a rare combination of aristocratic birth, democratic conviction, intellectual sophistication, and political skill. He surrounded himself with the leading thinkers and artists of his day, including the philosopher Anaxagoras, the sculptor Phidias, and the courtesan Aspasia. Pericles oversaw the construction of the Parthenon and other buildings that made the Acropolis a wonder of the ancient world. His funeral oration, delivered in honor of the Athenian dead in the first year of the Peloponnesian War, remains one of the most eloquent expressions of democratic ideals. Fact 73. The Parthenon, built between 447 and 432 BCE, is the supreme example of Greek temple architecture and an enduring symbol of Western civilization. Dedicated to Athena, the patron goddess of Athens, the temple housed a massive gold and ivory statue of the goddess created by Phidias. The Parthenon embodied mathematical refinements that give it a living quality. Its columns are slightly curved, its platforms slightly convex, and no two columns are exactly alike, compensating for optical illusions and creating an effect of organic perfection. The temple has influenced architecture for over 2,000 years. Fact 74. The sculpture of the Golden Age achieved a balance of idealism and naturalism that defined classical beauty. Phidias and his workshop created the sculptures of the Parthenon, including the frieze depicting the Panathenaic procession and the pediments, showing the birth of Athena and her contest with Poseidon. Polykleitos developed a system of ideal proportions for the human figure expressed in his sculpture the Dorophoros, or spear-bearer. These works established standards of beauty that shaped Western art through the Renaissance and beyond, defining how we imagine the human form at its most perfect. Fact 75. Greek art evolved through several stages from the Archaic period, when figures were stiff and stylized, through the severe style of the early Classical period, to the high classical perfection of Phidias and his contemporaries, and finally to the more emotional and dynamic works of the 4th century and Hellenistic period. This evolution represented not merely technical progress, but changing ideas about what art should express. Early Greek sculptors imitated Egyptian models. Later sculptors sought to capture movement, emotion, and individual character. Greek art tells a story of increasing ambition to represent the full range of human experience. Fact 76. Let the marble statues stand watch over your sleep, their serene faces catching starlight, their perfect bodies embodying ideals of beauty and strength that Greeks and their successors have admired for millennia. The Greeks believed that beauty was objective, discoverable through reason, and expressible in mathematical proportions. Their sculptures were not just decorations, but embodiments of divine and human excellence, visions of what men and gods could be at their best. Beauty for the Greeks was not merely pleasing but true, a glimpse of the eternal forms shining through mortal stone. Fact 77. The Peloponnesian War, fought between Athens and Sparta from 431 to 404 BCE, was the great catastrophe of classical Greece. The war pitted the Athenian Empire and its allies against the Peloponnesian League led by Sparta in a conflict that engulfed most of the Greek world. The historian Thucydides, who fought in the war and later wrote its history, considered it the greatest disturbance in Greek history, affecting not just armies, but entire populations through siege, plague, revolution, and massacre. Fact 78. The Peloponnesian War began over a series of disputes involving Athenian allies and Spartan allies, but its underlying cause was Spartan fear of growing Athenian power. Thucydides identified this fear as the true cause of the war, regardless of the specific incidents that triggered it. Athens relied on its navy and its empire for resources, while Sparta relied on its army and its alliance system. Neither side could strike decisively at the other's source of strength. The result was a long, grinding conflict that exhausted both sides and destroyed much of what they were fighting for. Fact 79. In 430 BCE, a devastating plague struck Athens, which was crowded with refugees sheltering behind its walls from Spartan invasion. The plague, whose exact nature remains debated, killed perhaps 1/4 of the Athenian population, including Pericles himself. Thucydides, who contracted the disease and survived, provided a clinical description of its symptoms and its effects on Athenian society. The plague demonstrated that Athens' strategy of avoiding land battle while relying on its walls and fleet had deadly vulnerabilities. With Pericles dead, Athenian leadership passed to less capable and more extreme figures. Fact 80. The Sicilian expedition of 415 to 413 BCE was the greatest disaster of the Peloponnesian War. Athens sent a massive force to Sicily to conquer Syracuse, a prosperous city allied with Sparta. The expedition was a gamble that, if successful, would have given Athens the resources to overwhelm its enemies. Instead, the expedition ended in complete catastrophe. The entire Athenian force was destroyed, over 40,000 men killed or enslaved. Athens never recovered from this blow, though it fought on for another decade before finally surrendering to Sparta in 404 BC. Fact 81. The defeat of Athens ended the Golden Age and began a new era of Greek history. Sparta established a brief hegemony that soon gave way to Theban dominance under the general Epaminondas, which in turn collapsed at his death in battle. The 4th century BCE was a period of continued warfare among the Greek city-states, during which they exhausted themselves in conflicts that made them vulnerable to outside forces. Meanwhile, to the north, the kingdom of Macedon was growing in power under its ambitious king, Philip II. Fact 82. Rest now in the quieter years between wars, when the philosophers continued to teach and the playwrights continued to write, when ordinary Greeks continued to farm their land, worship their gods, and raise their children. War is dramatic and fills the histories, but most of life is lived in the spaces between dramatic events. The Greeks of the 4th century still believed in their way of life, still valued freedom and excellence, still created works of lasting beauty. The city-states were weakening, but Greek civilization was spreading, preparing for a new phase of expansion under Macedonian leadership. Fact 83. Philip II of Macedon, who reigned from 359 to 336 BC, transformed a relatively backward kingdom on the northern fringe of the Greek world into the dominant power in Greece. Philip modernized the Macedonian army, creating the phalanx formation armed with long sarissa pikes that could defeat any Greek hoplite force. He expanded Macedonian territory through a combination of warfare, diplomacy, and bribery. At the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BC, Philip defeated an alliance of Greek states led by Athens and Thebes, establishing Macedonian control over Greece. Fact 84. Alexander the Great, Philip's son, inherited the Macedonian throne when Philip was assassinated in 336 BCE at the age of 20. Alexander had been tutored by Aristotle and trained from childhood for kingship and conquest. Within 13 years, he would create the largest empire the world had yet seen, conquering the Persian Empire, Egypt, and lands as far as India. His achievements would spread Greek culture across a vast territory and inaugurate the Hellenistic Age. Alexander died in Babylon in 323 BCE at the age of 32, leaving an empire that immediately fragmented among his generals. Fact 85. Alexander's conquests began with the crossing of the Hellespont into Asia in 334 BCE with approximately 40,000 soldiers. At the Granicus River, he defeated the Persian forces of Asia Minor. At Issus in 333 BCE, he defeated the Persian king Darius III himself, who fled the battlefield, abandoning his family to capture. Alexander treated Darius' family with respect, a gesture that enhanced his reputation for magnanimity. He then turned south, conquering the Phoenician coast and Egypt, where he was greeted as a liberator and founded the city of Alexandria. Fact 86. At the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BCE, Alexander defeated Darius decisively, ending the Persian Empire that had ruled the Near East for over 2 centuries. Darius was murdered by his own nobles as he fled, and Alexander claimed to be his successor as king of Asia. He continued his conquests eastward through Central Asia and into India, where his exhausted troops finally refused to go further. Alexander turned back and died in Babylon while planning further campaigns, perhaps to Arabia or the Western Mediterranean. His empire stretched from Greece to the borders of India, from Egypt to Central Asia. Fact 87. Alexander's legacy was not a unified empire, but the spread of Greek culture, called Hellenization, across the lands he conquered. The successor kingdoms that emerged from the wars following Alexander's death, including Ptolemaic Egypt, Seleucid Persia, and Antigonid Macedon, were ruled by Greeks or Macedonians who patronized Greek culture. Greek became the lingua franca of the Eastern Mediterranean and Near East, the language of trade, government, and learning. Cities were founded on the Greek model, with gymnasiums, theaters, and temples. Greek ideas spread to populations who had never before encountered them. Fact 88. The Hellenistic Age, from Alexander's death in 323 BCE to the Roman conquest of Egypt in 30 BCE, was an era of great cultural creativity and exchange. Greek culture interacted with Egyptian, Persian, Jewish, and other traditions, producing new syntheses. Philosophy continued to flourish, with new schools including Epicureanism, which taught that pleasure, understood as freedom from pain and disturbance, was the highest good, and Stoicism, which taught that virtue, understood as living in accordance with nature and reason, was the only good. These philosophies offered guidance for individuals seeking meaning in a world of vast empires and social disruption. Fact 89. Let the ages will by now. Greek civilization spreading and transforming as it encounters new peoples and new ideas. Alexander's dream of unity was never realized, his empire fragmented into warring kingdoms. But the cultural unity he created proved more durable than political unity. From the libraries of Alexandria to the temples of Bactria, Greek ideas mingled with local traditions, creating new forms of art, religion, and thought. The Hellenistic world was cosmopolitan in a way the classical polis could never be, open to influences from everywhere, creative in ways both continuous with and different from the classical achievement. Fact 90. The Library of Alexandria, founded by the Ptolemaic kings of Egypt in the 3rd century BCE, was the greatest repository of knowledge in the ancient world. The library aimed to collect copies of every book in existence, acquiring texts from throughout the known world by purchase, copying, or confiscation. At its height, the library may have contained over 400,000 scrolls, covering every subject known to the ancient world. Scholars associated with the library made fundamental contributions to textual criticism, geography, astronomy, and mathematics. The library represented the Hellenistic dream of gathering all human knowledge in one place. Fact 91. The Romans, who began as a small Italian city-state, gradually expanded until they dominated the entire Mediterranean world, including the Greek East. Greece itself became a Roman province in 146 BCE, and the last Hellenistic kingdom, Ptolemaic Egypt, fell to Rome in 30 BC. Yet the Roman conquest of Greece was in some sense also a Greek conquest of Rome. Educated Romans learned Greek, studied Greek philosophy, and imitated Greek art. Greek culture pervaded the Roman Empire, ensuring the survival and transmission of Greek achievements to later centuries. Fact 92. Greek influence on Rome was profound and lasting. Roman literature was deeply indebted to Greek models, from the epic poetry of Virgil to the philosophy of Cicero. Roman architecture adapted Greek styles, adding the arch and dome to the Greek column and pediment. Roman religion identified Greek gods with Roman counterparts, creating the familiar pantheon of Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and others. Greek philosophy, particularly Stoicism, shaped Roman ethics and statecraft. When educated Romans wrote, they often wrote in Greek. The Roman Empire was in many ways a Greco-Roman civilization. Fact 93. The transmission of Greek culture to the medieval and modern world depended on several channels. In the Byzantine Empire, the eastern continuation of the Roman Empire, Greek remained the language of government, religion, and culture for over 1,000 years. Byzantine scholars preserved and copied Greek manuscripts, transmitting them eventually to the Renaissance West. In the Islamic world, Greek philosophical and scientific works were translated into Arabic, studied and developed by Muslim scholars, and eventually transmitted to Europe through Spain and Sicily. Without these intermediaries, much of Greek culture might have been lost. Fact 94. The Renaissance, the cultural movement that began in Italy in the 14th century, was in significant part a recovery and revival of Greek learning. Renaissance scholars sought out Greek manuscripts, learned to read Greek, and translated Greek works into Latin and vernacular languages. They found in ancient Greece models of artistic beauty, philosophical wisdom, and civic virtue that inspired new achievements. Renaissance art and architecture drew heavily on classical models. Renaissance thinkers saw themselves as recovering a golden age after centuries of darkness, a view that shaped the Western understanding of history. Fact 95. Rest now in the long continuity of Greek influence, stretching from Homer to the present day. The Parthenon inspired the architecture of banks and courthouses, of capitals and museums around the world. Plato and Aristotle shaped Christian theology and Islamic philosophy. Greek drama is still performed in theaters descended from Greek originals. The Olympic Games, revived in 1896, continue to celebrate athletic excellence in the Greek tradition. Democracy, the Greek experiment, has become the dominant political ideal of the modern world. Greek is dead, yet Greek culture is everywhere alive. Fact 96. The ancient Greeks asked questions that we still ask today. What is justice? How should we live? What can we know? What is the nature of reality? How should society be organized? What makes art beautiful? Their answers varied, and we may disagree with many of them. But the questions themselves, the willingness to subject every assumption to rational scrutiny, the refusal to accept traditional answers simply because they were traditional, this is the Greek legacy that matters most. The examined life, Socrates said, is not worth living. This commitment to examination, to questioning, to following reason wherever it leads, is what the Greeks gave us. Fact 97. The ancient Greeks were not gods or heroes but human beings with all the limitations of their time and place. They owned slaves. They excluded women from public life. They fought endless destructive wars among themselves. They could be cruel, petty, and unjust. To idealize them is to misunderstand them and to miss the real lessons they offer. The Greeks achieved what they achieved not because they were perfect, but because they created a culture that valued excellence, that rewarded innovation, that encouraged individuals to develop their potential. Their failures remind us that even the greatest civilizations have blind spots. Fact 98. The landscape of Greece remains much as it was in ancient times. Rocky hills covered with scrub and olive trees, islands scattered across an impossibly blue sea, ruins catching the light where temples once stood complete. If you visit Delphi, you can stand where the Pythia delivered oracles. If you visit Athens, you can climb the same rock where Socrates was tried and see the Parthenon rising above the city. If you visit Olympia, you can walk where Olympic champions were crowned with olive wreaths. The past is not entirely past. It survives in the places where it happened, waiting for those who seek it. Fact 99. Sleep now, dreamer, cradled by the civilization that shaped your world. The wine-dark sea murmurs on distant shores. Columns gleam white against the stars. Philosophers walk through moonlit groves, debating truth and beauty. Athletes rest before tomorrow's contest. Soldiers dream of home, and poets compose verses that will outlast bronze. This is Greece, the cradle of the West, the school of humanity, the place where people first dared to ask the deepest questions and to seek answers through reason alone. May its spirit guard your rest, and may you wake refreshed, ready to carry forward what the Greeks began. Close your eyes. The Aegean wind has fallen calm. The temples stand silent on their sacred hills. The agora is empty, the theaters dark, the academies closed for the night. But somewhere, always, the conversation continues. In libraries and classrooms, in laboratories and studios, in councils and courts, people pursue the truth, create beauty, seek justice, and strive for excellence. This is the Greek legacy, not a fixed inheritance, but a living practice, renewed in every generation by those who take up the ancient challenge. Rest well. Tomorrow you will take up that challenge again. For now, let the wisdom of ages settle into your bones. Sleep and dream of Greece.